Greetings, dear listeners. The War of 1812 officially began when the United States declared war on the Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland and the dependencies thereof on June the 18th, 1812. On June the 4th, Congress voted 79 to 49 in favor of war. The vote received the support of most Democrat Republicans, President James Madison's party, and was opposed by all the members of the opposition Federalist Party, plus some disaffected Democrat Republicans. The Senate commenced debate on the declaration on June the 9th and considered such options as postponing hostilities, fighting a strictly naval war, and declaring war on both France and Britain. In the end, they rejected all of these ideas, and on June the 17th, voted in favor of the declaration by the narrow margin of 19 to 13. Opposition came largely from the Federalist Party, abetted again by a few disaffected Democrat Republicans. Neither of these political parties exist today. Simply put, the Federalists were the party of Washington and John Adams, while the Democrat Republicans were the party of Jefferson and James Madison. Today's Democrat and Republican parties are different political entities. The vote was held in response to the June 1st, 1812 war message from President Madison, which listed the following grievances. 1. The British practice of boarding American vessels, the U.S. being a neutral during the Napoleonic Wars, and impressing American seamen for service in the British Navy. 2. The Royal Navy's practice of violating American territorial waters. 3. The British blockade system. The British were ostensibly blockading French ports, but were seizing and confiscating American shipping on the high seas. 4. Madison's belief that American overtures to resolve these issues had been ignored and rebuffed by the British. He also said he had uncovered evidence of an English secret agent who had been employed since 1809 in attempts to subvert the U.S. government. And finally, number 5, that British agents operating from Canada were fomenting hostilities between Native American tribes and white settlers. Sources: The War of 1812, Conflict for a Continent by J.C.A. Stagg, and Precedents of War by Michael Beschloss. We live in a world of instant global communication, but this wasn't the case in 1812, where it took days, weeks, and sometimes months for people to learn of current events. We shall see how communication problems will plague both sides as the war progresses. The American declaration of war began a conflict which lasted from June the 18th, 1812 to February the 17th, 1815. 2 years, 7 months, 4 weeks, and 2 days. 4 weeks and 2 days. So how about we say 30 days? I make the total number of days as 974 days. But, dear listeners, you can check my math if you like. Source: Wikipedia, War of 1812. So, how did the belligerents break down? I have read in various sources the population of the U.S. variously estimated as from 6 to 8 million, with the population of the Canadas at 500,000. Interesting to me, the population of the UK was only 18 million, so the belligerents were more evenly matched than I had originally supposed. But Britannia ruled the waves. Again, according to Wikipedia, the U.S. Army had 7,000 men at the start of the war and 35,800 at the end. The U.S. Rangers consisted of 3,049 men, while the U.S. militia was 458,463. From information gleaned from Robert Malcomson's A Very Brilliant Affair, The Battle of Queenston Heights, 1812, the U.S. Army had less than 10,000 regulars, while there were, theoretically, 700,000 militia on the various state rolls, while the British had 1,150 regulars in Upper Canada, now Ontario, again backed by 11,650 militia. Again, according to Wikipedia, the British Army, by contrast, had 5,200 regulars at the start of the war, but 48,160 regulars at war's end. These were backed by 4,000 militia. On the seas, again, according to Wikipedia, the Americans sailed 12 frigates, 14 other vessels, and 515 privateers. A privateer, a private ship commissioned to seize enemy vessels during wartime. In other words, legal pirates. By contrast, the British boasted 11 ships of the line, 34 frigates, and 52 other vessels. These were supported by 9 ships of the Provincial Marine, a sort of Great Lakes Coast Guard operated by the British. In terms of indigenous allies, Wikipedia says the Americans were supported by 125 members of the Choctaw tribe. Choctaw. Choctaw. While the British enjoyed the support of between 10 to 15,000 warriors. William Wood was a Canadian historian who lived from 1864 to 1947. In 1915, he wrote a book called The War with the United States, Volume 14 of the Chronicles of Canada. While it's a very old book, I like the way Wood breaks down the antagonists. Regarding the American Army, he says that while 56,000 troops were enrolled during the war, no American general was able to field 6,000 men in actual battle. In contrast, Wood says the British Army had only 4,000 effectives defending a huge area at the start of the war, but by 1814, these were joined by 16,000 veterans of the Napoleonic/Peninsula War. Wood lists the grand total of British soldiers who served in the war at 34,000. The British Army was augmented by 4,000 Canadian regulars. With casualties and replacements, some 6,000 men were to serve in the following regiments: the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, the New Brunswick Regiment, the Canadian Fencibles, the Royal Veterans, the Canadian Voltigeurs, and I apologize for any mispronunciation, and finally, the Glengarry Light Infantry. With regards to the U.S. Navy, Wood notes that Thomas Jefferson, president from 1801 to 1809, didn't want a navy and thought America could defend itself with smaller gunboats. As a result, they went to war without a single ship of the line. Wood says some 10,000 men served in the Navy, which enjoyed considerable success in spite of such limitations. By way of contrast, Wood says 30,000 British seamen served in the war, but while Britannia had the world's greatest navy, he believed it had grown stale after 20 years of continuous war with France and through enormous losses of manpower. Wood also believes the Americans to be better shipbuilders. which showed itself through a series of remarkable naval victories. However, Wood thinks that Native Americans / First Nations warriors were a negligible factor in the war, an opinion I strongly disagree with. Wood also believes the total number of warriors to have been no more than 5,000. Finally, according to Wood, the total number of combatants during the War of 1812 was 700,000. Getting confused, dear listeners, with all these numbers? Well, I'm confused, and I'm your narrator. Figures as to the strength of the opposing forces varies according to your source. If you have different figures, dear listener, please share them with us in the comments below. Bottom line, the Americans outnumbered the British and Canadians on land, while the British dominated the Americans at sea. Which is ironic, considering what actually happened, as we shall see. So, the U.S. declares war on the British Empire on June the 18th, 1812. Then what happened? On June 22nd occurred the first of a series of riots in Baltimore, Maryland, between supporters of the Democrat-Republicans, and thus supporters of the war, and the Federalist opposition. Alexander Conte Hanson, a Federalist serving in the Maryland House of Delegates, had launched a newspaper called the Federal Republic and Commercial Gazette, which was highly critical of the Democrat-Republicans. On the 22nd, an angry mob of government supporters attacked the newspaper offices, destroying the printing press and the entire building. One attacker died when he fell while knocking out an upper-story window. Hanson swore he would continue publishing. On June 23rd, the British government of Lord Liverpool repealed the Orders in Council, one of which allowed the boarding and searching of neutral shipping, a major cause for the American declaration of war. But it was too late. According to Wikipedia, it took 41 days, until July 29th, for news of the declaration of war to reach the British government, while Madison didn't learn of the removal of the orders until 50 days, until August 12th, 50 days after their repeal. As we shall see going forward, slow and poor communication will be a major factor in the war. I know, understatement of the year. On June the 23rd, a U.S. squadron led by the USS President, Commodore John Rogers, a 44-gun, 3-masted frigate launched in 1800, veteran of both the Quasi and Barbary Wars, attacked HMS Belvidera. HMS Belvidera, a 5th-rate 36-gun frigate launched in 1809. After an engagement in which Rogers was wounded, his leg was broken, the Belvedira escaped and brought news of the war to Halifax, the principal British port in Canada. Source: the Wikipedia article on the USS President. On June 29th, 2 American schooners, the Sophia and the Island Packet, fleeing the St. Lawrence River towards Lake Ontario, were captured near the Thousand Islands and burned after their passengers and crew were allowed ashore. Source: 4gwar.wordpress.com, a site which actually covers the War of 1812 week by week. Now, while all this was going on, William Hull was on the march. Hull was a man of almost 60 years who had served with distinction during the Revolutionary War and who had also been governor of Michigan Territory since 1805. In early 1812, Hull was appointed Brigadier General in command of the Army of the Northwest, an appointment he accepted with reluctance. Hull took charge of 1,200 Ohio militiamen at Dayton on May the 25th. The 3 regiments of militia were commanded by Colonels Duncan MacArthur, Lewis Cass, CASS, and James Finley. This force was augmented by 300 regulars from the 4th Infantry Regiment, commanded by James Miller, which joined the force at Urbana, Ohio. The troops then began an epic 200-mile march through the wilderness to Detroit, which witnessed the army beginning to unravel, as documented in Pierre Berton's book, The Invasion of Canada. Hull's problems were compounded by unbelievably poor communications by Secretary of War William Eustis. When the bedraggled troops finally reached the Maumee River, Hull received a letter from Eustis, dated June 18th, advising him to hurry to Detroit, but neglecting to mention the simple fact that war had been declared. Source: Wikipedia article, William Hull. So, dear listeners, channeling my best Indy Nidell here, the first 12 days of the war conclude with a somewhat lukewarm declaration of war and action on both the high seas and the Great Lakes, and throughout Canada and the United States. Those people, and it sure isn't everybody, those people that know war has been declared wonder, what will happen next? Well, stay tuned to this channel and find out. Please share your thoughts and opinions on the video in the comments below, and please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I'm not an expert on the War of 1812, but a student interested in learning from others who are interested in the conflict. Till next time, cheers.